So hello, I try to speed up a little bit to save the 5 minutes we just lost. My name is Peter Karp from Fogra, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to have a presentation and discussion with you about color in PDF. That's what we will focus on the next slides. And after a very brief introduction to Fogra, by the way, who does not know Fogra? Okay, then I will take 2 sentences about that. Then we will discuss different PDF flavors, and we'll have a look how those different flavors might be used for different use cases, especially for cross-media applications, so for on-screen use or for print. And then we will focus on the color, how we can assure that the color is rendered correct. And a very important question is, what is the right color? Because that's not really self-explaining. There are different use cases where different needs or demands are there for color reproduction. And at the end, we will have a short look at practical challenges when dealing with color PDFs. So Fogra is a research institute founded more than 60 years ago. And the idea of this organization, we are a non-profit organization, is that we have funding from our members, which allows us to do independent research for the printing industry. And we are active, so in the research, we are active in consultancies, we are active in standardization bodies, and do also trainings for members and also for non-members. And we have different departments at Fogra, and of course the press department, but also the prepress department where I'm from, and we deal, besides other matters, with the data preparation, PDFX creation, and PDFX output. And we are happy that we have a cooperation with PDFX Ready, and we're able to include the PDFX Ready guidelines into a PSD handbook. And the PSD stands for Process Standard Digital, and is a handbook which is aimed to the digital printer to give him help and guidance how to come to a good printing result. And the slogan of the PSD is printing the expected. So that is the main goal we want to achieve, or want to help to achieve the digital printer. And we talk a little bit about softproof, where I'm very much involved at the end of the slides. And we are also active in digital publishing activities and other matters, which I don't go into detail today. So the question we have a look at today is it possible to have one PDF flavor for different use cases, so for screen and for print use? But of course, besides PDF, there are other file formats, but we don't go into the details for other formats, but focus on PDF today. Who is German speaking here? Okay. So most of you might know the Fliebertüt. That was a children's play on the TV, and there was a sort of helicopter there, and this helicopter could also swim, and it could also drive. So the question is, when we have some sort of vehicle, is it able to address all the needs equally good if we have a dedicated device, or in this case a combined device? And the same question applies to PDF. So we now have a look at different PDF flavors, and I tried to sort of structure the different use cases of PDF in a pretty rough categories for screen use, for print use, and for archiving. And you see the different PDF flavors over there, which are mostly used on screen. For example, a PDF UA document can often be viewed on screen, but might also get printed. And you see here typical use cases. Job printing, of course, normally it's printed, but might be seen sometimes on the screen and might sometimes be archived. But more often invoices or contracts and transactional printing, their archiving might be more important or more needed. And so you see there are different needs regarding a PDF. When we look at the PDF there, which we use for the different use cases, we can have RGB-based encoding or CMYK-based encoding. And mostly RGB-based encoding is used on screen, and CMYK-based encoding is mostly used for print. Could also be RGB, but is not used that often today. For archiving, what would be best, RGB, CMYK, or even device-independent color like LAB? That's the question on one side, which file type to use, which encoding to use. But even more important is which color is the right color for the different use cases. And for this, I want to introduce you to the pyramid of color reproduction. This was an idea from Mark D. Fairchild, a color scientist. And he says that the first step, and all the steps build on each other, is that you have a device which is capable to produce color. This is the very first step. But it's not that important how the color looks like. You're happy that you're at all able to print in, for example, here in red. The next step is to have a pleasing color reproduction. So that means the consumers find the image acceptable. Now it gets a little bit harder when we look at colorimetric color reproduction, and that means that we want to be able to reproduce a specific color colorimetrically, so that we can measure it to the right values. And on top of that, we could wish that we want to see a color or reproduce a color so that it takes the viewing conditions into account. You all know this effect that depending on the background or surround of a color, it will look different. And if you want to take this into account, this is the next step on top of a colorimetrical reproduction. And finally, you could ask for a color preference reproduction. For example, here is shown that you want to remove a red eye. If you have a file with red eye in photograph, and you want to make a colorimetric color reproduction, the eyes still will look red, but you might not like that. So you want to get rid of that effect. And very important is that even those steps build on each other. In some cases where you have a closed system, you can skip the step 3 or 4 and go to the preference reproduction right away. For example, if you assume an sRGB workflow for a mobile device, for example, you can already address some things like red eye removal or other improvements we will discuss later. This slide is very simple. You get what you pay for. So the effort you put into something will determine the quality and the final color accuracy, of course. And the know-how, the time, and the tools will be important. And not to forget the reference. What is your reference? Is your reference a colorimetric reproduction? Like here, the yellow pages in Germany, they have a defined value, and they want to achieve this value very accurate. Or is your aim to have a, or is the aim to have a preference reproduction, and the reference is more something like your memory colors and things like that you have in your mind. No reference which is can be seen in a file or in a physical sample. So we have two different needs when we look at a color reproduction, and for print normally We use today PDFX files, and the X stands for blind exchange. And the wish is that we want to reproduce the colors as close as possible to this reference specified in the data. So an improvement of the image, for example, to sharpen the image, would be not better, but it would be worse, because we are not closer to the reference, but we get further away from the reference. On the other side, for general usage, screen and print, often the wish is just to have nice colors, and improved colors are good in this case. When we take a look at the specific objects which can be used in a PDF, you have bitmaps, vector elements, images, and text. They serve different functions. And very often you have some photographs, and the purpose is to be pretty or to resemble the real color. And on the other side you have functional color, which serves the purpose to structure documents, or of course you have the information, the text, and those two types of elements can be combined, and you can name them info color. So you have the colors you want to render colorimetrically in a specified way, colorimetrically correct or improved, and then you have the colors where you really don't care about the color itself. A text, you just want the text to be black, to have a high contrast, but you don't care which black is it. You just want to print 100% of the process black, and that's fine. And you don't care about the exact color. Similar to this here, if you have a red line like this, you don't care what is exactly this red. You just want it to be the bright red, which you can distinguish from the other colors. Another pretty simple slide is to get there where you want to go, you have to know where you want to go beforehand, of course. And this is may sound very simple, but this is a real problem today, because when creating a document, often it is not known totally where the document will be printed, on exactly which printing press it will be printed. Or even it might not be known, will this document be used for printing and for screen? Will it be archived later? That is not always known beforehand. But to prepare a document in the best way, of course, you should know the final goal you want to achieve. So in a real or in a perfect world, that's our view, that you know, when we look at the press, you know the press parameters, the tone value increase, the solid colors, and so on. And when you know the printing condition, then you can prepare the data correct according the final printing condition. But as I said, the problem is that it's often not the case. So how can we deal with that? So one reason for the typical three-stage workflow which is used for print production today is shown here. We start normally with RGB-based data, for example, from a digital camera, and then we make a conversion to a reference exchange space. This is, in our world, normally a CMYK based file format. And then finally, we make a conversion to the final actual printing condition. And as we will see later, there's a reason that we use the intermediate step. We could go direct from RGB to the final CMYK. But as I said, often it's not known, the final output condition. So we cannot go there, and we have to choose something else. But why do we choose the intermediate step? The reason is that we have Gamut problems. Gamut defines the colors which can be shown on a device, the saturation of the colors. And if you have some colors which are more saturated than a specific device can display, and then you have a problem if you want to render the colors on this display, and you have to find a solution for that. For example, here you see that sRGB, and this is not the biggest RGB space we have, Adobe RGB or ECI RGB, which are used very much, have a much bigger color gamut. But even sRGB has colors which are pretty wide outside a typical printing condition, which is shown here in this area. So we have to deal with this. And the solution for this is to have a Gamut mapping, and there are two basic ways to render the colors which cannot be printed on a specific device or cannot be shown. That could also apply to a monitor. And the two basic rendering intents are that you render all the colors which are inside the gamut colorimetrically correct, and all the other colors are clipped. So you see here there were some colors in the file which were different, but after the conversion they are shown on the same color value. On the other side you could have a perceptual rendering where you compress the data and you change the color values so that you try to achieve a visual pleasing representation of the original color. But the colors themselves will all change. They will not be colorimetrically correct. And again, this is one of the slides we love most because you can explain very many things here. And when you go from RGB, you see here, you have the pure colors in RGB space, and when you make a conversion to a CMYK space, for example, here Fogra 39, you will lose much of the saturation. And the Gamut mapping strategy will be encoded in the different profiles you use, and this is the reason why you want to reference here in this step, because most of the biggest changes to the file happen in this stage. When you go later from this reference printing condition to the final printing condition, the changes are very small in comparison to this step. And as I said, we want to print the expected, and to fulfill the expectations, you have to know what the customer wants. And so we sometimes joke and say color management is that the users are enttäuscht? Disappointed, yes, disappointed at the first step and, and not later. So, and which exchange space should we use? We don't go into the details, but there are currently no exchange spaces defined to be used as such as an exchange space. Currently there are typical printing conditions like Fogra 39 or swap are used as an exchange space in the countries, but the wish is there to come up with a universal exchange space. You find more in the ISO 15339 regarding that. So when we now have a look, we again at our color workflow for print, we now address the Gamut mapping and separation. That means from going from RGB to the CMYK plates, including the amount of black which is used, which is very important. And then we come to the final step to go to the final printing condition. And the question is, how do we want to make this rendering? And very often a good idea is to have a media relative rendering. So that just means that a white, which is defined here in this exchange space, will stay white, not the same white, but it will stay white. If you have here one paper type defined and here you have a slightly different paper white defined, then you say paper white 1 will be mapped to the paper white of the second. And all other colors will follow accordingly. So we just make a little experiment regarding media relative rendering. Please have a look at this picture. And then I ask you to close your eyes. And if you followed me, I will continue to the next slide. Please close your eyes. Okay, thank you. So open your eyes. Okay, then please close your eyes again. Remember the color. Okay, open your eyes. So again, close your eyes, please. Okay, open your eyes. So now you saw a difference. I presented to you 5 different pictures, and when you 4, yes. Okay, great, you're still awake. 4 different pictures, and all of them were looking different. But from the memory, you just noticed that one of the pictures was different, and this shows that it makes sense to render colors media relative. So currently there was or there is no solution to objectively now there is, but there was no solution to objectively assess if the media relative color rendering is accurate, because as I explained, the colors will all change to some extent, and the question is how much are they allowed to change. So the last example you have seen, now the change was too big, whatever that means, so that should be ruled out. All the other representations could be seen more or less as equal, and we came up with a solution to address this problem, which you can read in the PSD handbook also, if you're interested more in this matter. Now we want to discuss which files you should use. We are still focusing on print, but later we will come more to the on-screen applications. So we have different kinds of flavors, as Stefan Jiggy already explained this morning, and PDFX Ready prepared guidelines according the time and the flavors which were available. And currently, most of the time, the suggestion is that you want to use PDFX for workflow, where you have live transparency, CMYK and spot colors, and that you don't use RGB data currently. That might become the future, and the reason why is that in many workflows RGB data can lead to surprising results. You can use it already today, and there are some companies successfully working with that. So we don't say you must not use it, but as a general rule, this is a safe solution. If you want to go the media neutral route, media neutral here means that you encode the data in RGB. The PDFX is tagged with an output intent which describes the meaning of the document for which condition it was prepared for, and then the conversion from whatever object is placed inside the PDF to the output intent takes place. So all the colors are defined colorimetrically correct. And this can also be done with RGB inside the file. But in this approach, you would have a PDFX file with CMYK values. So now we talked quite some time about the needs for printing, and we now want to look at the possible solution for cross-media PDFs. Is it possible? But still, there are some open problems or things which could be improved for printing. So if we talk about general use of the PDFs, of course, a PDFX is originally prepared only for one specific condition. So when we now create a PDFX file for a reference printing condition, this is not the final printing condition. You must not forget. So if we now have a look at the conversion for the reference PDF file, from the reference and exchange space to the final printing condition, or if we want to look, are there more needs which should be or could be addressed in PDFX, then we find the following, some already mentioned. For example, a good idea would be to merge standards so that a PDFX file could also include PDFA criteria and vice versa. Another very, very practical important point is the black point compensation. Does everybody know what black point compensation means? Black point compensation means, yes, means a lightness scaling. So it's a little bit of perceptual rendering, which is added on top of the media relative rendering intent. And this was introduced by Adobe many years ago, but different vendors had different implementations, and currently it's not officially supported in PDFX standard, but it would be very, very helpful because it allows not only to match the white point, like I showed in this example, but also it allows you to scale the black point to compress or enlarge the dynamic range according to the final output condition. Another thing already mentioned is page-leveled or object-based output intents, which could be interesting. Missing information like eyelet marks for LFP prints, for example. I just learned last week that the files are today often prepared in Photoshop just by hand, and that's really time-consuming process, of course. Hints for retargeting for channel preservation. We will have a slide later which explains what this is.
What is an eyelet mark?
Lochöse. Also die Markierung dafür. And you also mentioned that the printing sequence is something which is stated currently not in the document, and which would be helpful to know beforehand. And also to communicate spot color, additional informations would be very, very helpful, at least to have a definition for the solid spot color. If possible, how the spot color will look like on a specific type of paper, or full characterized to include the spectra and opacity of the spot color. So now we come to the big question: is it possible to prepare a PDFX or PDF document in general for print and screen? And there was a survey, PDFX Next, and I just show you here that the interest is pretty high. So as Dietmar said this morning, it would be very helpful to have PDFs which could cover both use cases. So will we see that? I hope so. But currently there's much discussion going on. I'm not personally involved in this discussion to that intent. You can tell much more about that. So the concept is very interesting, but there are technical challenges, and as I learned this morning during breakfast, the most important challenge might be that the vendors just use what would be defined. There are other things one has to look when we want to have a dual-purpose PDF. For example, for PDFX, as you know, multimedia content is forbidden because you cannot print a film, of course, and it's not allowed to have encryption. And that would be nice. If you think about ebooks and things like that, you might want to have an option to yes, for some sort of DRM management. Also, the conversion from Office documents should be addressed, which is a very important use case for many PDF files. So for the print-based applications, the Altona test suite already is very helpful to address or to test the workflow, and we will see that later also. But let's not forget, when we talk about different or when we talk about one PDF for different use cases, we have always to find a good balance between versatility versus predictability. So there's no free beer also for a universal PDF, of course. In practical challenges you have to deal with when you look at color PDF are transparencies. I invite you to the presentation from Florian Süssel tomorrow, and the next presentation from Dietmar Fuchs will also cover how to keep the channel-specific information. So the shortcut for this is to say keep zeros. Like in this example, you have a 100% RGB red from an Office file, and you want it printed only from the primary colors in the process, so that it looks in the brightest red it offers on screen would result in the brightest red on the print. And as a last slide, I want to mention another very important challenge for the printing industry. When a PDF is used for printing, of course it will be viewed beforehand on a monitor. And to display a file on a monitor, a print file, to render that is called soft proof. And a print has to be assessed under specific viewing conditions, which are defined in ISO 3664. But currently there's no standard which defines how to assess a PDF and in which surround it should be viewed. So you should have to take into account the options of the viewing software, of course, but also taking into account the actual viewing conditions. So this means the lighting you have in the room, because that will also have influence on the monitor soft proof. Some of the lights falling on the monitor will be reflected, and this will change the color appearance, especially in the dark shadows. And to make sure that for remote soft proofing, the colors are rendered correct even on another site, long distance, for example, in China or somewhere else in a different location, we would want to have a possibility to check and to document how the viewing conditions were. And the first approach for this is the Ghent Working Group softproof ticket, but there's still much missing, and this is some discussion, or there's some discussion going on in a current research project we have at Fogra, where we try to give input to implement such a softproof ticket. And as a very, very last slide, the summary is it's very important that the users have to be educated. So maybe after the presentation, when you read this again, you might read the complete quotation here, that it's the technology is already there mostly, but it's important that we learn how to use it, and that all the parties involved learn to use the tools in the right way. So if you want to keep in touch with us, with the color world, here are some invitations for us. You can note, for example, I invite you to the Fogra Color Management Symposium if you want to know more about the future of color. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Questions?